My name is Brian David Judkins. I am the lead writer oh, I already got this on the wrong slide. 2 seconds and we'll start over. There we go. Okay, here we go. My name is Brian David Judkins. I am the head writer and I guess sort of lead art design guy for Encounter Party. I'm probably going to get in trouble with my producer if I don't make a slight pitch, but this actually has some relevance, so give me 2 seconds to promote ourselves here. Encounter Party is an audio adventure podcast, and we like to say that we're somewhere in between an audio drama and an actual play. And the reason that that's super relevant in this particular seminar is because one of the things that we identified was that when you're trying to make content for entertainment, especially in this sort of new burgeoning entertainment field genre about sort of actual plays and live streaming and gaming and stuff like that, we've sort of realized that there's a bit of a mix between personalities, characters, and writing. And we decided, because we really weren't anybody, even if you've seen any of our other work, you're not going to know us personally. We aren't personalities. We decided to focus on, instead, lay down heavy on the story and then worry about the personalities and the characters and anything like that could possibly come afterwards. So thankfully, Encounter Party has grown. We have a great deal of success globally, and one of the reasons that we've had a great deal of success is because we're story-focused forward. We've been able to attract a great number of fans who don't play D&D at all because they're focused most on the sort of literature element of that. So because we're going to be doing a talk that is about writing writing expecting people to watch you, or expecting people to kind of tune in, I thought it might be appropriate to kind of take this on two realms and not necessarily just talk about a podcast or an actual play. I thought maybe we could take a couple of minutes to also talk about the parallels in just writing strategy in general. So you guys aren't walking out of here with just a limited aspect. You're walking out of here with just some general rules that you'll be able to apply to some other things, but we are going to talk about sort of the podcasting element, because that is majorly what I work on. Okay. Encounter Party, go watch it. EncounterParty.com, go listen to it. I'll announce something else at the end, but let's get into the good stuff. Okay, here we go. Keep in mind at the end, we're going to be doing Discord stuff. If you did not get a chance to ask Ned a question from the last event, pop into the Discord, leave your questions there. He'll answer them in text. Same thing with me. If we end up going towards the end and we don't get a chance to do everything on camera, drop your questions in the Discord and we will answer them over the next 24 hours. Writing. Okay, so the big problem when it comes to at least this new form of entertainment is the fact that some aspects of this are improvised, right? As a writer, either you're at the head of the table, you're playing a DM, or you're collaborating with other people on writing projects, or you're doing improvised stuff on camera. That itself carries a lot of fright for me, because I'm a guy who very much likes to be in control. I like to have everything laid out. Once everything is just sort of like a magic sort of strand, I'm a very happy person. But the idea of giving control to other people might be super duper scary. So the first thing that I want to talk about with my skeleton buddy over here is we're immediately going to start by learning how to cheat. Let's just start right there. Let's figure out how to cheat the whole system and do something that's about a third easier than anything else you possibly could be doing. When you're writing an adventure with the intent of, I'm also going to ask that if our tech guy happens to be watching this, can you actually change the name of the, like that, boom, like that, he scripted it immediately. Okay, writing an adventure for entertainment. When you are writing for people to watch, you are going to lean into cinematic writing. Now, that is something that has become a point of aggravation for some people in literature, is the fact that people tend to kind of write for showmanship and for visual quality. tough. It's good. It's entertaining. It's exciting. Especially if you're like us, where you're an audio podcast. People need to be able to see what they're hearing. They want that type of excitement. So don't be afraid of that. However, one of the other things that we run into as we immediately hardwall into a problem and we accept cinematic writing is, boy, there are a lot of movies out there that certainly feel the same as all the other movies, don't they? If you're not careful and you start trying to think of a super exciting scene to write, the next thing you know, you're writing something that's already been written and it deflates immediately. And then who gives a care about what you're doing? So we need to focus on a system that allows us to be inventive, creative, stick to a plan that does not lock anything down so that we can not be in charge. Sounds good, right? No. Okay. Let's start with the very, very first thing as we get into the first rule of cheating. The first rule of cheating is throw the first thing out that you write. Done. First idea that you have, you don't even have to write it down. You don't even have to do it. First idea that you have, get rid of it. It's not original. Every successful professional writer that I know immediately sits down and immediately goes, that's a cool idea. And they immediately recognize where they pulled it from. The question is not, well, why should I throw that out? The question is, what attracted you to that concept in the first place, okay? If I got an idea for, I don't know, a rescue mission where some girl gets kidnapped and I got to get some grizzled guy to go rescue her. Come on, man, there's been dozens of those movies in the last 6 years, but why did I like that? Well, there's something about the middle-aged guy going on a hard mission. You know, maybe I'm a fan of Liam Neeson or something like that. And that's going to kind of point me in the direction of a type of story that I want to grab. The next thing that you want to identify is, what is the emotion that you were chasing out of that? What is it about that story that was so visceral for you that's something that you want to sit in? You know, some of these stories of people who are really into horror, the question is always, what is it about horror that you like? Why do you like sitting in that moment? And these are the things that are going to clue you in to your sort of beginning topics. We're immediately going to hit a pitfall, but I'm going to save that pitfall to the end because I'm going to make a note here because it's so important. It's actually a life lesson. You guys ready for life lessons? All right. So we've already cheated. We've gotten rid of the first thing. We're feeling emotions. We haven't actually written anything yet. Cool. What you need to do if you're going to be writing an adventure is you're going to be thinking about particular moments that are going to be entertaining. You're going to be hunting for those emotional feelings. Those moments where people go, or those people who they get so mad, or when your audience freaks out or your characters freak out the minute that somebody in your cast starts crying because they've been affected by an NPC, or the minute somebody turns a page in your book and a character they didn't believe was actually alive still is alive. Those emotional moments are going to be sort of your key checkpoints. And you're going to write around that skeleton. And you're going to figure out a way to curve everything into those moments, because ultimately that's the experience you want to create. Again, we're going to talk at the end, but the important thing is when you're writing adventures for entertainment, okay, when you are writing for TV, podcasts, you're writing for something to be viewed and consumed, you are writing for the audience. And that's something that we're going to keep hammering home on, is you are trying to create an experience for the audience. And that requires them to consume it, and you're just going to control what you feed them. So those big emotional moments are the aspects that they're going to remember the most. So we're going to capture that stuff, and we're going to build around that skeleton. This writing, sorry, we should clarify. This is assuming that you guys already kind of have an idea. This is not a seminar about how to write from scratch. This is an idea that's going to take you how to develop the basic concept of a show and actually make it world building and stuff like that we did at another seminar yesterday. You guys can view the VOD on that on our Twitch channel. Right now we're going to talk about this skeleton system. Okay. Now, when we talk about the size of the skeleton that we want to make, now we start getting into some trouble because there are a lot of different sizes of adventures to consume out there. We're going to talk about the literature parallel and the actual adventure. Somebody expressed that they wanted to learn about one-shots today. Here you go, right out the gate. One-shots and short stories are meant to be consumed in one sitting. Okay? That means that somebody needs to get an entire experience in one sit-down consumption spot. These are a fantastic way to start, especially if you have an incredibly good idea, but you feel like you lack experience. David Ives had a great quote where he said, there's a very big difference between taste and skill. Just because you know what a good story is doesn't mean that you can necessarily write a good story. Just because you know what a good cake tastes like doesn't mean you can sit down and make one. One-shots and short stories may feel empty to those of us like me who enjoy consuming big, giant stories. I want to sit with something for years. But these are an amazing way to cut your teeth on. You don't have time for a big scene. You got no time. Focus on a singular event, that singular moment, that singular emotion that you guys were grabbing onto. If you want shock and awe, if you want a horror setting, if you want a sort of you know, some of these adventures immediately just go to end in a quiet, serene, sort of effervescent walk out the front door by the end of it. Whatever that singular emotion is, you're going to build the entire experience around that. But only pick one. You're not going to get a complicated thing. You're going to get, if you're writing a short story, you get like 10 pages, 15 minutes. If you're writing an adventure, you get like 3 hours, 3.5 hours max, if it's done efficiently. That big emotional moment that you're going to be chasing, that's going to be your end point. That's going to be how you round everything off. You're going to spend 2 hours, 9 pages. You're going to be spending everything building up to just that one moment, because that is the moment that people are going to walk away from. It's difficult to retain all of the details outside of something that usually doesn't have a lot of weight to it. At the end of the day, if you guys are playing one-shots this weekend, you're going to walk away with a couple of key moments. But you may remember the characters less. You may remember the other people you sat down and played with less. But you'll certainly remember those moments where everybody around the table, where somebody came up with a really, really great idea and the table went crazy, or somebody rolled a natural 20 and it saved everybody. Now, those are obviously moments you can't script, but you can script the big emotional moment at the end. So chase that emotional feel. One of the... first spelling mistake already. You don't have time to build a world with this. So the world just has to be very, very tiny. Somebody escaped from prison. That's all you need to know. There's a failing in the prison system. Somebody got kidnapped. That's all you need to know. Somebody needs somebody to go deliver something to somebody else. Boom, that's all you need to know. The world is somebody needs something delivered. That's all you need to know to move forward. You will not have time to set up exposition. You will not have time to set up a lot of stuff. Grab a simple, singular idea. Also, with one-shots and short stories, as opposed to some of the stuff that we talked about with world building where you need to have a big open-ended scenario, you don't need to have that with this. The world can literally drop off the face of the earth once the story ends. Don't worry about that. Keep it simple. Great way to start, though. Seriously. Okay. Now that we got sort of the quick bite-sized thing out of the way, let's talk about the basic foundation of writing. If you've never seen this before, this is a physical representation of what's called a story arc. You must know this. If you are going to walk in and write an adventure, if you're going to write anything that is not an instruction manual, you have to understand what this is. This charts the path of a story. This is pretty much law. And anybody who's arguing is being a snob. Storytelling continues to change medium, but it doesn't really change structure anymore. In fact, people in Hollywood will argue there's only 3 stories. Let's talk about that real quick. It's really quick. There's only 3 stories. There's man versus man, man versus himself, and man versus world. You can break every story down into that. The story arc is a skill that we've developed over thousands of years, relaying information to each other in a dramatic way. This is the formula you use to deliver emotion, not information. This is how you deliver emotion, because it has a categorized and formulaic build. This is not a new concept. We've only just been writing it down very recently. This is a skill humans have been developing unconsciously for thousands of years. This arc will not let you down. Treat it as your Bible. You can play with it later once you're super published. For right now, stick with this formula. The exposition or the status, I don't like using exposition in this particular term because I don't think it's entirely correct, but status is really important. Establish what you are going to be doing as clearly and concisely as you possibly can. The rising action is everything necessary to build up to the climax, which is going to deliver the emotion you are trying to exhibit, and then the falling action and the resolution. Usually, the falling action is very quick. Often the resolution is the final page. A lot of this stuff often drops off when you're talking about an adventure formula. When you're talking about action, when you're talking about the genres that we're all interested in and the stuff that we're trying to communicate, a lot of times the falling action and resolution are very, very, very short. So don't feel like you need a big, long development on that. When you're talking about other stuff, when you're talking about some of the genres like horror or mystery, mystery is an excellent example because usually the climax is the reveal of the crime, and then there is usually some after effects where you continue the story a little bit to find out how individual characters dealt with it, or you find out how characters, the detective might reflect on it or stuff like that. That type of genre can stretch out for a little bit. But when it comes to writing an adventure for viewership and for entertainment, your climax is going to be pretty much the end. Now, when we talk about short campaigns, you only should worry about focusing on one single path of that arc, okay? Don't worry on complicating it. Don't worry about having multiple details. You need to focus on a singular objective. Now, what is an objective? Any actor on the planet will tell you ad nauseum what an objective is. Every character has one. Every character has one after the establishment of the stasis. Okay? When we talk about some familiar concepts like protagonists, antagonists, these people are going to have different objectives. I have a pretty good source of a helpful way, I think, to define that. Throw out the concept of good guys and bad guys. Just worry about objective. And I'm going to give it to you straight in one easy way. Protagonists want to change the status. Antagonists want to keep the status. Okay, so if we go back to the arc and we look at what's going on here, your hero characters, or the people that you are following across the story, want to change the status. Your protagonists want to keep it the same. Okay, so even if your protagonist is a supervillain who wants to take over the world, he's been working on taking over the world before your status even begins, before page 1. His long-reaching plan of taking over the world is the status. The hero who steps in to change it, that is the difference, okay? So once you know What is the status? What is trying to be changed? The objective is just literally that. What is each piece trying to do? Your protagonist is trying to change the status in various ways. Your antagonist is trying to keep the status the same. As long as you maintain those two balances, your story's going to function. It's that simple. The question is, on objective, is why is today different than yesterday? Okay? Today is the day the story begins. So why didn't the story begin yesterday? The story didn't begin yesterday because the protagonist didn't have an objective yesterday. Your antagonist did, but your protagonist didn't have an objective yesterday. So what happened today that makes your protagonist, the people who we follow in the story, what sets them on that motion? Could be they find their dad's old sword. Could be somebody has taken his daughter. But that is how you figure out how to get going. When it comes to short campaigns and novellas, focus on one thing. A giant overarching villain trying to conquer the world is not fit for a short story. My favorite novella that constitutes as a novella is the book that Hellraiser was based on, because it is a short story that is singularly focused about a guy trying to get his body back. Fantastic, short, clean, but there's so much fruit in there and there's so much of a world. Because you're focusing on that singular arc, you have to keep people on track. If you start wandering, if you start going on side quests, or you start focusing on the life of this person too much, a short story will turn into a long story, and then you're talking about a completely different formula. And if you did not start your story to be formulated for a long story, you're going to run out of steam. You'll see the difference amount as we go in. You'll see the difference when we start talking about stuff of that size. So the most important thing about your short campaigns is know what the objective is of both your protagonists and your antagonists, and keep everybody on track until you resolve that stuff. Use the checkpoint system. It's so easy. All you have to do is get from point A to point B and let everybody in between do the rest. We're going to talk about how to let them do the rest later, but all you have to write is the checkpoints, the settings. Where are they going to be? What are they going to be doing? You don't have to write each and every beat out. Scaling up. Large campaigns, novels. These are things that you cannot consume in one go unless you're my wife and you can devour a book in 3 hours. These require multiple settings. In my opinion, they require a minimum of 3. It is unlikely you are going to devour a book in 2 sittings. The reason for that is we're going to scale way back. Look at the arc. If you divide that directly in half, you end up split in the middle of the rising action, which means you would have the establishment of the status about half the journey, and then on the back half of that, you would finish the journey and then the climax. It's just a really bad place emotionally to stop, because you've got unresolved things in the middle. So it's unlikely that somebody just straight up stops in the middle of what would be considered development. If we break this up into 3, we get a much better situation. We have some time with the establishment, getting people used to your story, understanding what that part is. Then you have the entire middle phase that's development, so you can begin the growth. And then usually you can spot the climax ahead of time, so people then can kind of take a minute to get ready for the climax, and then deal with the aftermath. They can emotionally prepare for that emotion you're trying to invoke. Invoke, evoke. Evoke. Emotion you're trying to evoke. I believe. It's going to be bad if a writer doesn't know the definition of words. That word's no longer in the seminar. We're going to move on. So, mathematically, we can divide this into a minimum of 3 parts. So, using rules of lowest common denominator, we're going to stick with the rule of 3. Split everything up into thirds. And then make mini arcs out of each of those 3. So we're going to take the establishment, and normally when you're dealing with like a novella, when you're dealing with a small thing, the question of why is today different than today? Instead of making that a singular incident, now you're going to spread that out over something a little bit longer. It might take your characters a weekend out in the sun to sort of understand what the establishment is. Think about a great film is like 28 Days Later. If you guys haven't seen that movie, it's a guy who wakes up in an apocalypse. Or if you think about something like The Walking Dead, think about, you know, it kind of took an acceptable amount of time to sort of grasp the fact that there's zombies around. Okay? I would categorize something like that as a short campaign. Everybody's calling out my... Apparently I typed the word too fast. T-O-O. I can't spell that one. Think about Game of Thrones. Spoilers if you don't know it. It isn't really until Ned Stark gets killed that you understand what the status of the world is. How many emotional things you get exposed to, and it's almost the entirety of the first book for what we know is a very, very long story. So that's what you're looking to do in this particular length, is you're looking to have a mini arc, and the climax of that mini arc is going to be the emotion that establishes the status. Okay? If you listen to our show in Counterparty, you will hear it immediately. Guess how many episodes it takes to establish the status? And each one of those episodes has a mini arc. Rule of 3. It works great. Same thing with the rising action. You're going to take the entirety of development and you're going to turn that into an arc. The establishment of the rising action arc is everything that happened before. So your characters now know what their place is in this story. And the climax of the rising action arc is going to be the setup of what's called the point of no return. Now, the point of no return happens somewhere between the rising action. And the point of no return is the moment where it's exactly what it says. There's no going back. There's no way your characters can reverse what they know. They cannot walk back on the actions they've taken. So when you're looking at a large campaign like this with multiple implications of arcs, the rising action arc is about taking your time to establish the point where there is no going back. For you, for your audience, for your players, for your readers. That's the whole point of that mini arc. Then, when you're talking about the climax arc, you can set up something a lot longer. You can build that climax even higher by doing a long form. Also, the climax doesn't need to be a single peak when you're talking about something of this length. It can be kind of like this. A great example is one of my favorite movies is a film called Last of the Mohicans. And at the end of that film, it's about a guy and a friend of his are chasing some. It takes place in the French and Indian War. So it's a man and his friend are chasing down some enemy Native Americans who have kidnapped some women and the guy's son. And there's several things that they have to deal with. They have to cut their way through the enemies up the mountain. So that's like one really big intense thing. And then that drops off and they have to deal with the falling action and the consequences of what they did, just killing all of these people. And then there's another mini climax where the son and the main antagonist of the story have a one-on-one fight. And then there's another mini climax where the women deal with the falling action of what that just happened. And then the main characters catch up. And there's like 4 mini climaxes right in a row in about 10 minutes worth of film. And it's amazing. So when you're dealing with these longer stretched campaigns, you get a chance to really kind of play with this stuff. Maybe you do a story where they're assaulting a fortress and you have 3 or 4 battles that they have to get to before they get to the big guy. Maybe you do kind of in an opposite situation where some people... this is a big thing in like Japanese cinema where character value is a lot less in Japanese writing. So people kind of die left and right. So you have these mini climactic moments where, you know, everybody gets sort of a mini scene real quick where they get to sacrifice themselves or something like that. These are great examples of really cinematic, really high intensity, high emotional driven moments that you can just stack right on top of each other like this. And then your climax arc ends up like a spastic echocardiogram. Great if that's what you want to do. And you can use that for a couple of ways. You can use that to try and hit people with a couple of emotions, right? You can hit them with like, yay, we did it. Oh, no, we didn't do it. Oh, yes, we did do it. Oh, God, the cost was too high. Yeah, screw that guy. Like you can stack all of these really, really interesting emotions sort of like right on top of each other. Or you can compound. You can kind of set up a situation where, you know, if people are giving their lives, every death hurts more. Every death is more painful. And you're just begging that, oh my God, there's 3 people left. Are they really going to kill? Who's going to survive? And you can just stack that emotion on top of it. It's a lot you can play with, but we are getting into a very, very long structure here, which can be very, very, very challenging, which is why I always recommend start with either a one-shot or a small thing so you can kind of cut your teeth on the formula of an arc before you start playing with it. Again, an arc just has to go up to the climax and go down. There's nothing that says that it isn't status, a very sharp rising action, and then a very sharp decrease, and then just a lot of fallout. There are films I know. There's a film called It's called Blue Haven or Blue Heaven. Oh God, please somebody find this for me. The entire point of the film is supposed to expose people to what fighting and killing somebody is really like. And it's about a young guy who ends up finding the man who killed his father in the first 10 minutes. And he finds him like in a bathroom and they get in a fight and he kills him. And it's brutal. Okay, it is. If you're not comfortable with intense violence, do not seek out this film. The climax is in the first 10 minutes of the film, and then the entire film. No, I don't think it was made in the 90s. I think it was made in 2012. I say questionably. The climax is in the first like 10-15 minutes of the film, and the entire rest of the film is falling action and resolution. It's a very, very bold, formula, but really, really, really an interesting way to sort of discuss how that arc might somehow be really, really, really sharp. It could be the same way in your adventure if you're writing a novel or if you're writing a campaign where you just sort of come right out the gate with something very, very intense. And then the rest of the story is your characters kind of dealing with that in an emotional way. Might be a really, really interesting formula to play with. Might be a good source for a one-shot or a smaller campaign. But these are kind of the obvious structures, okay? Let's tap into the last structure that we have here, and that is open-ended campaigns or never-ending stories. These are some bold moves, Cotter. Why? Well, if you're going to go into this route where you're going to be open-ended, you got to have a pretty good relationship with who you're presenting to. Now, what I mean by this is let's now talk about player contribution, audience contribution, that sort of thing. With the first three examples, your job is to create a skeleton. Everything's going to be built off that skeleton, okay? You're going to have the power to kind of force things back if you need them to. The story is going to have an obvious beginning, middle, and end. Now, what gets tricky with that formula is that when it comes to doing collaborative material, improvised material, actual play podcasts, even if you're writing a compendium, even if you're writing an adventure that's just meant to be read and then played independently of you, you have to write a bare bones structure without beating out every single individual moment. A beat is an industry term for it's a subunit of a scene. Okay, so a scene is then broken down into beats, and beats are broken down into individual lines. You don't have the time or the energy or even the capacity to lay things out that meticulously. So you need your actors, you need your fellow writers, you need your audience in some particular measure to fill in that stuff. Which is why we rely so heavy on the skeleton, because it just provides you a bare bones thing. But when you're talking about open-ended campaigns, you're talking about a skeleton that's never going to stop growing. You're talking about something that doesn't have any end in sight. So it's difficult without that end. You can't plot that arc. You can't plot where the end of that arc is. So you just sort of have this weird never-ending rainbow that doesn't actually land anywhere. This is important. It's important to recognize for a couple of things. We're going to address the big guy in the room, which is Critical Role. Currently has an open-ended campaign for all that we know. We, within Counterparty, have been approached by a studio to convert our show into a television streaming program, which we are going to do. Our current campaign has an end. The next one doesn't. We're going to enter into an open-ended campaign because we are interested in audience participation. We're interested in seeing where things are going, and we don't want to close ourselves off before we're ready to close ourselves off. When you're talking about something this big, when you're talking about writing, you need to have a pretty firm comprehension of the writing industry if you're going to step into something like this. Even if you're sitting down and playing with your friends, okay? You hear about these campaigns where these guys have been playing D&D for 10 plus years. I guarantee you that their stories have started and ended. When you think about, sometimes I'm a guy, when I was younger, I just started biting off more than I could chew. I just wanted to do these big things. I didn't want to bother with small material. But at the end of the day, the small material are the building blocks. If you want to create something this big, I highly recommend that you find a way to implement a bunch of tiny things and change up the rhythm. Do a one-shot to establish things, and then build a new arc that has a new stasis based off the stasis created by the one-shot. Allow those things to move stuff forward, okay? The more you can break your larger stuff down into this sort of rule of three, the more manageable it's going to be for you, I promise. Be aware, if you are creating an adventure for entertainment, if you are building an audience, I'm going to preface this statement by saying a very, very clear question. Why is it that nobody likes the ending of shows? Why does nobody like the finale? Why does nobody like the final episode? It's not because they suck. It's not because they don't resolve. People usually don't like the endings of these shows because by the time a show gets around to have a really big must-see TV ending, the show is no longer in the hands of the show creator. It's not their show anymore. It's their fans' show. And the fans don't get any say as to how their story ends, of the show that they're in charge of now. If you are trying to be an entertainer, if you are trying to write something open-ended, something without a clear arc to it, you must accept the fact that as the lead creator, it will cease to be yours at some point. This is the time where you need to start considering business options, what that sort of stuff means. If that seems daunting to you for any reason, this is so much farther than you can chew. It's too big for you. You will imagine these ideas of having a show that runs for 5 years and this huge story and it's going to be this huge impact. It all comes down to breaking that formula down into those arcs, because ultimately that's what it's going to be. That's what it's going to be shaped. Very few people write a TV show, a novel, any of that sort of stuff with the entirety in mind. The beginning and the end. They rarely do. And sometimes it can be really challenging because success might drive you to have to expand the story, a la Lost, which just ironically got lost in its writing. So keep that in mind before you start trying to get too big. That's where we are. Let's talk about some pitfalls. Artificial drama. It's dumb. It's shallow. It's bad. If it isn't motivated, if it doesn't fall in line with somebody's objective, you can't force an emotion. Do you remember when we were talking about earlier, chase the emotion, chase the emotion, chase the emotion? Here's the unfortunate backside of that formula. There is no equation to produce an emotion. It doesn't exist. In all of humanity, there is not a single thing I can do to guarantee you will evoke the emotion that I'm trying to get you to express or to feel. Okay? There's no direct formula for that. Emotion is a response to an event. It is not the thing that comes first. In writing, if you guys haven't heard this term, there's called triggers and effects. You might hear that as you're writing. That might just make sense to you instinctively. Triggers are the things that send events in motions. Event is what comes and it follows. Emotion is always a response. That's why it's called an emotional response. Nobody feels a thing and then acts on the feeling in that order. Something happens and then they feel a thing. And then they do something else and then they feel another thing after that. There's two bookends to that people don't understand when you're writing. You can't force a feeling. I have written what I've considered to be some very, very dramatic, very, very intense stuff, and I've had another author laugh and be like, dude, that scene was so funny that you wrote, I was dying on the floor. And it was supposed to be an incredibly emotional scene about a guy battling with alcoholism. Actually, it was a character who was battling with alcoholism, and it was supposed to be this really sort of difficult, triumphant thing. But this guy thought that it was kind of a goofy comedy scene. There's no predicting the emotion that you're going to be able to develop. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be chasing it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be writing in prep for it, because the more skilled that you become at writing and the more skilled that you are at developing your craft, you're going to have more control over that. We've been doing Encounter Party for about 1.5 years. We have about 40 episodes out. We have been able, depending on what we're doing, sometimes to predict some emotional scenarios. Sometimes my writing, for at least thankfully a large portion of it, has been able to establish a certain amount of weight and establish a predicted value on a particular thing so that when you boost it or you tear it away, you can express a particular emotion. An example. How many times have you seen a story where they introduce a character, never develop the character, or introduce the character 2 minutes before they die, and they try to do that whole like, oh, I tell my wife I love her. Oh, I was going to be big. Oh, I had dreams, man. Oh, dang, I died in this war. It's valueless. It's empty. It's absolute garbage because they haven't established any weight. If you really, really want as much control as you can about producing that emotion, you have to work at putting value in the right place. It's why horror films try so hard to spook you, to build suspense, because that's the best way that they're going to scare you. If somebody's sitting down in a coffee shop having a latte and some guy comes in with a murderous act, it's not gonna have the same weight as if you kind of build and let people know what the value of that experience is going to be. So don't just try and artificially slip in stuff. Take the time to establish the value, okay? Don't just force stuff in. It's dumb. This next note is super important for just writing in general because people do this and it kills me. And people mistake why this is valuable. Making something personal does not make it more dramatic. It does not. I'm begging you to please walk away with this concept. They completely castrated the Bond movies by trying to make it a personal experience. It's just flat. If you want to tell personal stories, they have to be personal from the get-go. You cannot get halfway down the arc and then reveal that something is personal. Or you can't make the resolution require it to suddenly be personal. You won't force it. You have to establish the value. In your skeleton, make sure that the beats people keep hitting are personal beats, are things that are relevant directly to those characters. Let your audience and let your actors fill in everything in between. All they need to do is get through that door. How they get through the door, it doesn't matter. That's for them to decide. That is the emotion and the beauty of podcasting and actual plays is let them decide how they're going to get through it. They will create the emotion themselves. Now they've made it personal. Give control to them. Let them make it personal. Or make it so that that door is the door to a family manor. Or make it so that one of the characters' father was an expert door maker. And you guys encounter a door for the father she's never seen, but she knows his work. Establishing personal value on the way through will make it dramatic later, but don't just try and surprise and it just doesn't. It never works. It never works. To comment on that, you can't force an emotion. You cannot decide anybody's personal journey. Your players, your audience, your readers, anybody you are writing for, you cannot tell them how they're going to reflect on a piece. You cannot tell them what their journey is going to be. That's trying to write everything too thinly. That's trying to, or precisely. That's you trying to micromanage everything. Set your checkpoints, set the skeleton, let everybody else fill everything in between, because as long as your checkpoints are clear, they'll get there on their own. That's it. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But the better of a writer you are, the more attractive that lake is going to look. Okay, when we're talking specifically about something like an actual play, when we're talking about I want to write an adventure, I want to write a compendium, I want to write a story that people are going to consume for entertainment value, consequences, conflict are things that are going to create drama. The world needs to bite back. Superheroes are boring. Not superhero stories. Superheroes in general are people who are categorized by what they don't have to worry about anymore. Right? When it comes to the Flash, time is not a problem for him. When it comes to Superman, all that we learn is these are all the things that aren't a problem to this character. It's only when we get into their weaknesses that they understand what is a problem. It's only until kryptonite is introduced that the world begins to bite back. Now the story is interesting. Make people suffer consequences. Make the world not just keel over on their way through. Protagonists want to change the status. The status does not want to be changed. It's the status. The antagonist does not want the story to be changed. It's the status. The world is going to push back from change. That's where you're going to get your drama from. Don't be afraid to strong arm. If you're working with other people and you're the guy at the head of the table or you're writing the compendium, don't be afraid to prevent apocalypses by shoving everything back on course. You can do this with a cinematic event. In video games, it's called a cinematic event where you don't really get to control stuff. It's the illusion of choice. The more your environment is real, the more consequences exist, the less sort of unstoppable control your protagonists are in, the easier it's going to be for you to course correct if anything begins to go off the rails. One of my final notes here. You can't force an emotion without establishing value. You can't establish the value of your own work. Therefore, you can't force the emotion that people are going to feel about you as a creator. People are going to come up with really creative ideas. You're going to feel really powerful about a couple of things. People may not like you. I enjoy some content and I don't like the people who make it. I enjoy some people and I'm not really a fan of anything they do. If you're trying to write for an adventure because you're chasing that moment where people sit back and go, you're good, it's not likely to happen. Writers are people who kind of take a back seat sometimes. You're known for your work. You're not necessarily known for your personality. I would not try and mix the two. Some of the most high-profile people who are writers end up regretting it because often their personality doesn't necessarily match what people expect it to be based on your work. On that note, don't write self-aware adventures. You're creating a fantasy world, you're creating a fictional world, you're creating a false world. If you introduce any elements that connect it to our reality, to anything like that, you drop immersion immediately. It's not clever. It's been done to death. Take a backseat to your own work. And finally, I say this at the end of every one of my things. Kill your babies. I'm begging you, if you are a writer, if you are a creator, if you've never done anything before in your life, I am begging you, please have the creative maturity and set up the network necessary to be able to find out what is bad, not working, need to be put aside, not quite fitting in yet. You have to figure out the stuff that isn't slotting correctly because it is only going to weigh you down. Show your work to other people, get collaboration, find a critical network of people who are willing to tell you if something is not working without worrying about breaking your heart. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're any good. We're about to wrap up here. I spent a lot of time talking. I like to maximize this stuff, which is one of the reasons we set up the Discord server the way that we did this time. So if you guys have questions about writings, if you have things that you wanted to do, I'm leaving that open for a long, long time. Please type your questions and then go off and enjoy the rest of the convention. Do whatever you want. You don't need me to read these things on air, I don't think, but I will have more time to answer your questions if you talk in there. So pop into the Discord and ask any questions you guys want, and then we'll ask them here. If there's something you absolutely need to know right now, I've got 2 minutes. Probably not. Okay. Enjoy your con. Thank you guys so much. I hope this gave you a shockingly aggressive idea of what it takes to kind of write some of these things. If you would like some ideas of a lot of the formula that works. Oh, a little side note. There's nothing that says that you can't use a trope or something like that to evoke a particular emotion if you know. If you want to do a Seven Samurai story where you guys have to protect a village from bandits, yeah, that's fine. But as long as that's not like the entirety of your story, if it's just sort of like a mini arc or a beat, there's nobody that says you can't do that because you already know what the formula of that emotion is going to come out, or you might invent a new one. So don't be afraid of cheating when it comes to stuff like this, as long as it's only a scene or a section or stuff like that. But other than that, go enjoy the con and have a great time. Listen to Encounter Party. If you want some examples of everything that we're talking about, I know it's selfish promotion, but we are a story-focused forward adventure podcast. So you will very clearly hear the skeleton. Now, kind of knowing the secret of how we write, you'll be able to hear the skeleton. You'll be able to hear the contribution from other people, and every 3 episodes is an arc, so you'll be able to plot out that stuff. So at least go check out the first 3 episodes. If you feel like you need some more clarity. We're going to be around. Encounterparty.com has the schedule for the weekend. We have a lot more seminars. Mainly on Sunday at 4 o'clock Eastern, we are doing a mock recording session. So for those of you who are interested in writing or doing something about this, we've kind of been taking all of our seminars and we're going to pile them into one demonstration at the end. So you guys will get sort of a oh man, pop-up video was a long time ago. You guys will get an over-the-shoulder experience as to kind of all the decisions that we make on hand to create this type of program. Go forth, write, throw it away, and then write again. Thanks, guys.